This is the Bryan Hyde Show.
Well, hello there and welcome to the show. Every Tuesday, I look forward to my chance to visit with Eric Peters from Eric Peters Autos. Today's the day. Eric, how are you?
I'm good. I dug out of the blizzard we got the other day. We actually got more snow here in Southwest Virginia than we've had in years. I've lived here for about 20 years, and we used to routinely get pretty heavy winters. But for probably about the last, 3 or 4, we've had essentially no winter to speak of. So I foolishly did not hook up the plow to my tractor. So yeah, that's what you get for poor future time orientation sometimes.
So I have to ask, and this is only because I'm hailing from southern Idaho right now, where we've had no snow or very little snow. How much did you guys get?
I'd say probably, I'm looking out the window, good 6 inches, which, for this area, that's a pretty substantial amount of snow.
Okay, let's take a moment and just because first snow of the season usually brings some of the craziest driving experiences that people are going to see, especially in more southern states. Let's talk about some common sense things people should keep in mind before the snow falls. What are some of the things you recommend, either about stuff to have in your car or things they should know before they set out on slick roads?
Well, as it turns out, you ask a very pertinent question because yesterday, by the grace of the motor gods, we went out in the Lincoln Navigator that I'm test driving this week, and I just, for some random reason, threw a pair of gloves in the truck. And I was very grateful that I had those gloves because we hit a pothole and we blew a tire in the middle of the blizzard. So I had to get out in the blizzard and deal with the cheesy little flimsy jack that comes in the thing and pull that 24-inch wheel. It has a 24-inch wheel. That's 2 feet. This big, and heavy off that thing. And if I'd had to do that with my ungloved bare hands, it probably would have not gone very well. So, if you're going to venture out in inclement, potentially dangerous conditions, dress appropriately and at least bring things that you might need if you do get stuck by the side of the road, such as gloves, maybe have a blanket in the back for just in case. I think it's also a very good idea to anticipate, if you possibly can, that these conditions are coming and fill your gas tank so that you don't find yourself out on the road somewhere with that little fuel light coming on and, what are you going to do now? Make sure that your tires are in good shape. A lot of people think they need all-wheel drive. You and I were talking about this a little bit before we got on the air. And yeah, all-wheel drive can help, but what can help even more is just a good set of tires. On a front-wheel drive car in particular, if you have those and you know how to drive in the snow, that's the key variable here, you're probably going to be fine in anything shy of a really epic blizzard, like a foot of snow or something like that.
Since you mentioned potholes, I want to just share a similar cautionary tale rather. My wife assumed it was just a puddle of water, but you
no.
you can tell where there's potholes, starting to form. Puddles of water are not something you should take for granted. And
Yes.
as she was driving along, she hit it. This was at night, and it was such a deep pothole. It literally bent the rim on our Volkswagen
Yes.
Tiguan. And immediately the tire air pressure sensor comes on, and we stopped, and I can hear the psst. It bent the rim.
Yeah.
And long story short, it was so expensive just to replace the rim. We actually ended up trading it in and getting a different car from the Volkswagen dealership. Not Volkswagen, by the way.
You raise something that people should be aware of. You've probably noticed in new cars, they now typically come with, they call them rims now instead of wheels.
Yes.
And these rims are much, much larger by historical standards than the wheels that used to typically come standard on most mass market vehicles. Used to be that a mass market vehicle would have typically a 15 or a 16-inch wheel. And even some back in the 70s had 14 inches. But now, typically, you'll have at least a 17 or an 18-inch wheel. And as in the case of this Navigator, big SUV, a 24-inch rim.
Wow.
Now, when you have rims that big, you have very narrow sidewalls. This is the cosmetics, the look people seem to like now. The problem is that really thin sidewall doesn't have a lot of give built into it. So it can't take a hit. So what happens in your case and in mine, you hit this pothole and the impact force ends up not only blowing the tire, but bending that aluminum wheel. They're not steel anymore, so they can't absorb an impact as well as the steel wheels could. And now you've got a damaged wheel in addition to the bad tire, so you're having the double whammy of having to replace the wheel and the tire, and that can be hugely expensive. I wouldn't even want to guess. Well, okay, I will guess. I bet you a rim for that Navigator is probably about $800, and it might be more than that.
For the Volkswagen, and this was 4 years ago, 5 years ago, it was over $500 just for the rim. And of course, it was 2 weeks away, and it was anyway. But yes, be very cautious when you see standing water. Better know what's underneath. That big splash may have a big clunk attached to it. By the way, let's talk about tiny tires as opposed to the big 24-inch tire. It's kind of a mixed bag. When you buy a car, or for that matter, let's say you rent a car and you're not familiar with it, but you get a flat tire. Sometimes it can be really unpleasant to discover what you're left to work with in terms of like the little donut that that's supposed to get you to
Oh yeah,
safety.
and be grateful if you have even that. A number of new vehicles, probably the majority, no longer have any type of spare tire at all. Instead, they have what are called inflator kits. So it's like a little mini air compressor and a bottle of goo. It's basically Fix-A-Flat. Like you go to the auto parts store and buy the aerosol can of Fix-A-Flat, and that's fine if you have a nail in the tread, let's say, but it's useless if you have a sidewall tear. If that part of the tire is damaged, you're stuck. You're going to have to call road service. So me personally, I would not want to drive around in a car with just an inflator kit. I would want a proper tire, a proper full-size spare, not one of those little donut mini spares either. Those are serviceable, but basically you're kind of limping down the road on those things. They are much smaller than the other three tires and wheels that you have, thinner. And so the vehicle handles and brakes really weirdly. And they even tell you don't drive any faster than about 50 miles per hour, which is lots of fun if you're out on the interstate, and you've got to go another 100 miles to get to where you were going to be. So, me personally, I'd sacrifice a little bit of trunk space, to have that full size spare in there for just in case, along with proper tools, by the way, because they tend to use these really flimsy, just bare bones, minimum basic, like a little scissors jack, maybe that's super sketchy and not very stable. And a tiny little lug wrench. Luckily, I'm pretty strong. I couldn't have gotten those lug nuts off, or a lot of them. Dawn couldn't have done it. You need something with more leverage. So those are things to think about, and maybe to get them and put them in your vehicle for that day when you're going to need them.
And the lug nuts situation is also something you need to be prepared for. I found this out the hard way a couple of years ago. Suffered a blowout coming back from a brief camping trip, and I was 20 miles from anywhere. Fortunately, AAA was sending somebody to help me, but I tried to change that flat and found out that the wrench that I had in my tools wasn't sufficient to break the torque to torque those nuts off there. Whoever put them on really, wanted to
Well,
make
you
sure they
probably used an
stayed.
air gun,
And
yep.
that's what it took. I was stranded until fortunately there was about three different farm trucks that came by, and the third guy, just a migrant worker with a impact wrench, said, "I can take care of that for you." Brr, 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 done.
Yep. Yep.
I'll tell you what, I knew what I was going to ask for Father's Day that next year too. I was like,
Yeah, and
something
by the
something
way, be
compact
careful when you
works.
take your vehicle in to get tires or brake work done. It's a really good idea to ask them to manually tighten the lug nuts, because of speed. They want to get it done quickly. They tend to use the air gun, and a lot of times they'll over torque the wheels. And it's not just an inconvenience. Brake rotors on modern cars tend to be made of fairly thin material, and if those lug nuts are over tightened, they can warp your rotors.
Oh,
And that gets into money, a lot of times, because there's not enough material on them to machine them any longer. So they're throwaways once they're damaged. So, potentially you get your tires changed and now your brakes pulsate, and you get that weirdness going on. And the only way to correct that is to replace those damaged rotors.
oh, that's good to know. I want to shift gears. Let's talk about food. In fact, let's
Yep.
talk about your article about the cost of real food.
Mhm.
You had mentioned you and I had talked earlier about how sometimes we eat what's convenient. Look, I'm a busy guy. I got places to go. I just grab what's convenient and what tastes good. But when it comes to real food, it seems like sometimes there's a premium price attached to that. I would point to Trader Joe's and
Oh, yeah.
organic foods and stuff like that. What are your thoughts on Frankenfood?
Well, Frankenfood, and just not food generally. Let's put it that way. We've all been noticing and been complaining about the cost of food, and real food, meaning single ingredient foods. Things like butter, eggs, things like that are actually healthy for you. They've gotten even more expensive. So it's kind of difficult to justify paying the extra for the real food when you can get this cheaper food. However, the cheaper food isn't good for your health. And you'll probably end up being unhealthy and then having health related expenses as a result of eating the bad food that's got all these ingredients in them, things like canola oil. Everybody's talking about this now, which is good because they should. Carrageenan and all these other things that our bodies are not designed to deal with. Don't take your health for granted. Now, if you start buying the real food, you'll notice A, you're satisfied with less of it. And B, if you stop buying the processed stuff, the pre-made stuff, you'll actually end up saving money in the long run. I've personally done this. That was the inspiration for the column. Back in August, I had this issue with gout, and otherwise a healthy guy. I run, I lift weights, I do all the right things. I don't smoke, I hardly drink, and yet I had that problem because I had porked up to 232 pounds, which for me is big. Well, I just had this come to Jesus moment. I stopped eating the bad food. I started eating the good food. I've dropped 22 pounds. I feel
Wow.
great. And I'm spending less money, which is a huge benefit. And so that's the gist of the article. If you look at it on a case by case basis, like when you're standing in line at the checkout with the real butter, the real eggs, the real meat, yeah, it looks like it costs you more. But if you factor out what you're spending in total over time, you'll see that you're probably spending less, and you're going to need less health care, almost certainly. And that healthcare stuff, you think food is expensive? If you develop a chronic condition like diabetes or high blood pressure or something like that that puts you on the pill bandwagon, wait and see how much that costs you.
Oh yeah, and it's a recurring cost. I mean, I look at just my mom is 90, but she's on pretty minimal. She doesn't have to take a lot of different drugs each day. She takes vitamins, she takes supplements, but I know people who have 20 or more pills a day that they have to take just to support the basic necessities. And yeah, it's not cheap.
Really interesting thing happened to me in terms of just the way my perception of things. Once I got straight with food, I found that when I went to supermarkets, there's literally nothing there I want to eat. Now that I'm in the habit of reading labels and seeing what's in those foods, the only thing I go to a regular supermarket for anymore, dog food, cat food, and paper towels. That's it. I go other places to get real food. And you just realize how toxic it is all around you. I don't want to sound like I'm being a channeler of RFK Jr., but it's the truth. They're literally poisoning us with this stuff. If you read the labels of things now, in addition to the 3 paragraph long thing, you'll read things like bioengineered ingredients, frankenfood. You want to put this stuff in your body, things that were, God only knows what they're doing with this stuff and what it's doing to your body.
Yeah, it's going to make me one of those purists who only shops at local farmer markets and wants everything locally sourced as much as possible. But it is what it is, and you're not wrong. There's a lot of stuff out there masquerading as food that if we took the time to read the ingredients list, most of us would be stunned, maybe
Sure,
horrified.
sure. The more you look into it, the worse it is.
Speaking of horrified, um, let me get your take on Pete Hegseth and his just vigorous defense of blowing up boatloads of people that are apparently, in his eyes, deserving of it. Due process not needed.
Yeah, that one particular incident that I think you're referring to doubles down on the despicability. The case of this one supposed drug boat that was shot or disabled, and these two guys are obviously helpless and in the water. They're no longer a threat to anybody, and they murdered them. This is something that we should be extremely appalled by to do this. You don't just summarily execute people without trial, without process. This is the sort of thing, and I know it's overused, but it is exactly the sort of thing that the Germans were hanged for after World War II. Capturing POWs, surrendered soldiers, and gunning them down in the field. Remember the Malmedy massacre? They hanged people for that, and now we're doing this stuff, and there's no apology. There's no sense of contrition at all. I mean, it's not like, oh, things got out of hand. Somebody was, in the moment they let off an extra, barrage of weapons fire that it's unapologetic, and it really should freak us out, I think.
It's probably the biggest, most in-your-face example of might makes right trying to assert itself. And what really troubles me, I've seen the federal government do this before. I saw it under, particularly under W. Obama killed plenty of people, including American citizens, via drone strike extrajudicially. So this is just kind of a continuation of that same approach to foreign policy. But the danger here is how many people will willingly embrace it and sometimes even cheer thinking that,
Yes.
well, these guys in the water, they're nothing more than insects, and their deaths make our lives better. But if the government can do it or is willing to do it to them, what's to stop it from doing the same thing to you?
Yeah, well, I think the broader point here is it represents a cheapening of respect for life. Once you are okay with just slaughtering people indiscriminately when it's not necessary, this isn't somebody who's in a position to fight back at that moment. So you stop. We learned this lesson, didn't we, when we were kids? You get into a fight, and if the other guy's down, you don't kick him in the head. That's it. Okay, you've won the fight. That's it. It doesn't have to go any farther. But now it's going to the ultimate nth degree. And as you say, if we get comfortable with the government using this sort of power against those people, to think that they're not going to wheel around and use it against us, I think is incredibly naive.
Yep, I think there are some universal laws that apply to self-defense. And even though we call it the Department of War now instead of the Department of Defense, government rightly shouldn't be doing things that we wouldn't morally be able to do for ourselves. And so I don't know. I know there's someone who will say, Bryan, you're just trying to defend, communists, or you're trying to defend these drug dealers. I don't know that they were drug dealers. I don't know that all I know is somebody
Exactly.
claims that they are and kills them, and I'm supposed to applaud as if this somehow is doing me a favor. I'm not buying it.
Exactly right. Exactly right. And there's an additional element here too that to me is even more troubling. Trump and Hegseth, these guys are sitting in their offices. They're not the ones doing the wet work. There's something even worse about these guys just having other people killed, like a mafia don somewhere, and not personally being the ones that are doing it, which at least makes the person kind of connected to the action, what they're doing. I can't get into the headspace of just ordering people killed like that.
Yeah, I'm not trying to stir dissent among the ranks, and people who really, really love everything Trump does will probably take offense, but you cannot set your principles aside because you think your guy has it all under control. I think we've seen pretty clearly, your guy isn't always going to be the one who's exercising those powers. And so don't hand government any tools you wouldn't want to see used against you.
Sure, and purely on a self-interested basis, consider the point of view of the people in Venezuela. This is being done to their people.
Yep.
We are becoming a kind of pariah state, a lawless state, a state that engages in terroristic acts. So, once that perception is widespread, then it's open season, isn't it? Why not do things to us? Why not hit back using the same kinds of tactics? And is that the kind of world that we want to live in?
This is why I think it's essential that people understand. They need to understand history. They need to understand original intent. What did the founders intend when they shaped our government the way that they did? It wasn't, hey, whatever the president says he can do and whatever he wants, as long as it's, for national security. They didn't provide those kind of loopholes. Those were created later through judicial precedent or just flat out usurpation of power. But most people wouldn't know the difference because they really haven't taken the time to look into the thinking behind the framers.
Well, and sure. And why is this even the priority? I mean, it's almost here. We voted for Trump to make America great again, to be concerned with what goes on in this country and to improve the lot of Americans here. And now, we're preoccupied. He is preoccupied with Venezuela and these guys running speedboats off the coast of Venezuela. It's bizarre, isn't it?
Yep, I've joked before, if they keep this up, we're going to have to change we're going to change our national hymn to how great we art,
that's great.
That seems to be the attitude every time somebody gets blown up, somewhere else. Well, they hurt us, so this proves how good we are. Eric, I appreciate your common sense and appreciate your down-to-earth analysis on current events. Stay warm and look forward to our next conversation.
Thank you, Bryan. Looking forward to it.
This is the Bryan Hyde Show.